All right, welcome. Today, we're unlocking the foundational ideas of the guy who pretty much started psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. We're going to break down his famous theory to understand exactly how he thought the human mind actually works, and how our deepest, kind of messiest conflicts completely shape who we are.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder what really drives your behavior? Like, are the choices you make every single day completely under your conscious control, or are there hidden internal motives, needs and impulses you aren't even remotely aware of, just pulling the strings from behind the scenes?
Well, to make sense of it all, we're going to use a classic rule of three. Freud's theory beautifully breaks down into a really simple roadmap for us today. First, personality dynamics. Second, personality structure. And third, psychosexual development.
Starting right off with number 1, personality dynamics, or the mind as an iceberg.
So, to explain human consciousness, Freud used this totally iconic metaphor of an iceberg. At the very top, literally just that tiny tip poking out above the freezing water, is your conscious mind. This is the stuff you're aware of right now. The thoughts, the perceptions, the feelings you're actively experiencing in this exact moment. It's really just the surface level.
But just below that surface is what he called the pre-conscious mind. Think of this middle layer like a waiting room, or maybe a mental filing cabinet. It holds your stored knowledge and memories. You aren't actively thinking about them right this second, but if you needed to remember, say, what you had for dinner last night, you could quickly pull it right up into your conscious awareness.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that Freud believed the vast, massive bottom of the iceberg, the unconscious mind, is actually the absolute most important part of our psychic activity. This deep, hidden layer contains our repressed wishes, deep fears, totally unacceptable desires, and even violent motives. It's huge, we are completely unaware of it, and we definitely can't just easily recall what's down there.
So how does all that intense material get shoved down there in the first place? Well, Freud pointed to a process called repression. Basically, we naturally take our unsatisfied desires and our painful experiences and just force them deep down into this unconscious layer. And here's the kicker. They don't just disappear. They quietly and actively dictate our behavior patterns and essentially shape our whole personality.
Which leads us perfectly into part 2, personality structure, the famous id, ego, and superego. If the mind is this giant iceberg, you kind of have to ask who exactly lives inside it. Freud proposed that there are 3 internal characters constantly fighting for control. On one extreme, you have the id. This is pure, primal energy. It's totally guided by the pleasure principle, meaning it wants immediate gratification right now and it wants to avoid pain at all costs. On the total opposite side is the superego. This is your strict internalized moral code, handed down by society and your parents. It operates on the moral principle. It's all about conscience and demanding absolute perfection, literally without caring about practical reality at all.
And stuck right in the middle of this wildly intense internal conflict is the ego. The ego actually develops out of the primal id, but it operates on the reality principle. It's mostly conscious, and honestly, it has an incredibly stressful job. It has to act as the smart mediator, figuring out which of those wild demands from the id can actually be safely satisfied in the real world without breaking the strict, idealistic rules of the superego.
And this brilliantly illustrates Freud's view of the ego as the literal police force in man. It is the exhausted peacekeeper, desperately trying to manage the peace between our most primal inherited drives and the incredibly harsh, demanding reality of everyday social existence.
So to put that all into perspective, you might want to mental screenshot this summary. The id seeks absolute pleasure, the superego demands strict morality, and the ego is forced to govern the reality of both. These 3 interlocking systems form the absolute core of how Freud believed we navigate the world and make our choices.
All right, moving into our third and final section, psychosexual development, or the stages of human development. So how do these internal forces actually evolve as we age? Freud believed that over a human lifespan, we move through 5 distinct psychosexual stages, from birth all the way to adolescence and beyond. And crucially, he linked each specific stage to an erogenous zone, meaning a specific part of the body that provides pleasure and gratification during that exact window of development.
First up is the oral stage, from birth to about 2 years old, where the mouth is the primary focus for feeding and sucking. And a really vital concept here is that if a child gets stuck or fixated at this stage, Freud believed it would deeply affect their adult personality later on. Next up is the anal stage, from 2 to 3 years old. This is all about toilet training, where gratification is focused on learning control over the anal zone.
Then, from 3 to 5 years old, we hit the phallic stage, where the focus shifts to the genitals. Now, as an impartial explainer, I need to point out that this is where Freud's theories get highly historical and, frankly, very controversial. He proposed the Oedipus and Electra complexes here, arguing that children develop subconscious sexual feelings for their opposite-sex parents. Obviously, modern psychology largely rejects this today, but it is a foundational piece of his original text in theory.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the final stages. From age 6 through puberty, kids enter the latency stage. This is kind of a dormant period where sexual interests are just temporarily repressed, and all that energy is pushed outward into the world, into social learning, school, and friendships. Finally, from adolescence onward, we enter the general stage, transitioning fully into mature, adult sexual relationships.
So the crucial point is really captured right here. Freud argued that our journey through these very specific childhood stages, and especially any fixations we pick up along the way, ultimately dictates exactly who we become as adults. Now sure, a lot of these specific concepts have been heavily debated or debunked over time, but understanding this framework is absolutely crucial for seeing where modern talk therapy came from, and how psychology first started digging into the hidden depths of the mind.
Which brings us right back to our final thought for today. After exploring the massive, hidden depths of the unconscious mind, the endless internal police work of the ego, and the deep roots of our childhood development, I'll ask you one more time. Is your conscious mind truly in control? Thank you so much for exploring Freud's fascinating concepts with me in today's explainer, and definitely keep questioning what lies beneath the surface.